everyone, welcome to our last couple of chapters of the book, and this will be our last recording, so let's go on with it. This chapter is called Flight Home. Oh, also, if anyone can tell me where I am, just obviously I'm a bit left, if anyone can tell me where I am, let me know in the comments below. Okay. Lila woke Fred just before sunrise. The light was blue-grey and her face was gaunt. She looked closer to 80 years than to 12. "You have to make sure he gets there, Fred," she said. She took hold of his arm and dug her nails into it to make sure he was listening. "You don't have a choice." Fred could feel the heat radiating from her skin, the heat of hope and desperation and love. "I know that," he said. He barely had time to splash water on his face before the explorer was calling them. "Quick, all of you!" He stood in the middle of the stone city in a patch of light, the sun shining on the scales of his signet ring. It's time. They gathered around the aeroplane just as they had in the airfield. It felt, Fred thought, like years ago. They were all four of them, less neat now. Their clothes were burnt, mud-covered, fish-flavoured and torn. Their faces and hands were covered in mosquito bites and scratches. They were slightly thinner, slightly rangier and slightly tougher. Lila's hands were shaking as she took Baka and draped him over the explorer's neck. "He makes a much better scarf than monkeys do." Her eyes glittered, but she did not let a tear fall. "Will you look after him?" "What?" said the explorer, startled. "Of course not. But please, he's not old enough to be alone yet. He doesn't need me, he needs you. He's yours. You rescued him, you fed him, you need him." "But my parents," "Your parents will understand. They'll see these are not ordinary circumstances." He placed Baka just below her shoulder, as if affixing a medal. "You belong to each other." The explorer lifted Max and laid him in the back seat. "Comfortable?" Max's eyes were closed and his breathing was very shallow. His fingers had begun to swell. "Not long now, little cataclysm." He touched Max's head and turned to Lila. "He's a very loud enigma, but I'm glad to have met him. Very glad." "He loved you," said Lila. "Loves you," she corrected herself, blanching. The explorer swallowed, then nodded. He cupped his hand for her foot, and she climbed into the plane, cradling Max in her lap. "Listen," he looked down at Max's flushed cheek. "When you get home, tell them how large the world is and how green, and tell them the beauty of the world makes demands on you. You'll need reminding. If you believe the world is small and tawdry, it's easy to be so yourself. The world is so tall and so beautiful a place. And all of you, do not forget that, lost out here, you were brave even in your sleep. Do not forget to take risks. Standing ovations await your bravery." Con swallowed. "But I'm afraid," she whispered. The explorer nodded, scarred and dusty and matter of fact. "You're right to be afraid. Be brave anyway." He held out a hand to Con and she took it like a queen and climbed into the plane. She squeezed in next to Lila on the back seat. Together they arranged Max across their laps. The explorer looked at Fred for a long moment. Then he jerked his head towards the front seat. Fred swung up into the plane. "Lila, hold steady. I'm about to shut the door." He slammed shut the yellow tin door of the plane and fixed the catch. "And one more thing. Remember, if you learn nothing else, remember to check daily for maggots. I once had an entire colony in the crook of my elbow." "In your elbow?" Fred's brain spun a full circle. "Exactly so. It was a terrible blow to my vanity." He turned to go. Fred's eyes stretched wide. "Wait, I think I know who you..." But the explorer was already stalking back into the jungle. Fred stared after him. Max gave a grunt of pain and Lila bent over him. "We need to go," she said. Fred nodded. He shook himself and set his feet against the pedals. He took a last look at the explorer. "Ready?" He called to the back seat. "Ready," said Con. Her jaw was locked so tightly she could hear her teeth chattering, but she managed to smile. "Ready," said Lila. She gathered Max closer to her and sheltered his head in her arms. Fred glanced over his shoulder. Max lay still, breathing shallow breaths. Con and Lila were holding hands, their knuckles were white. Fred pressed the ignition button. The engine woke, spluttered, and gave a roar like an animal. He pulled back on the throttle and steered the nose of the aeroplane straight towards Fear and home. The field they landed in was a large one, used for grazing cattle. It was long and as green as the Amazon. They bumped painfully, rose, bumped down again. The cows bellowed in terror and scattered. The front wheel shook, the back wheel bucked. There was a moment where they felt as if they would flip wing over tip, but the plane shuddered, roared and stilled. The cows never fully recovered. For the rest of his life, Fred would feel gratitude when he smelt freshly mown grass. The rest of it was a blur. Fred and Con burnt the plane by dropping a lighted branch into the engine, Lila standing well back with Max in her arms. They sat in the grass, watching the yellow wings turn red, and waited. Before long, the fire attracted a crowd. There were hordes of people shouting in languages Fred didn't know, with Lila attempting to interpret. Then, a journey by horse to a family with a motor launch. Doctors, the boat ride, Menelaus. A hospital for Max. Telegrams, telephone calls. A man and a woman tiptoeing into a hospital room and gathering Max and Lila so tightly in their arms they gasped for breath. And then a huge ocean liner with gold walls, dining rooms, and steak and ice cream, and a piano that Lila played, hesitantly, beautifully, seated between her two parents with Backer around her neck, while Con and Max leapt in circles around the mirrored ballroom, scandalising the other passengers. Fred sat with his knees tucked up on one of the silk-backed chairs and watched them. He tried to speak sternly to his body, but whenever he thought of his father, his fingertips and knees began to quiver with nerves and hopes. "Don't," he told himself. "Don't. It's an office day. He has to work. He'll send the housekeeper." Each day the air grew cooler every hour. The smell of the sea changed from green to blue. And then, before he had time to set his thoughts onto straight lines, to brush the green of the Amazon from his heart, the ship was heading into the dock. A row of people stood by the waterside, their fists tight, their eyes vivid with tension and longing. Fred raked them for a familiar face. The crew lowered the gangplank, and Max and Lila let out a cry. The grandmother stood at the barrier, her arms stretching out towards the ship. The two of them hurtled down the gangplank and were swept up in her embrace. The parents followed, laughing. The old woman had the same wicked tilt to her eyebrows as Max. "Con!" called a voice. Con turned around and her face flashed a light. Fred turned in time to see her great aunt, standing upright and gaunt and shaking with emotion as she watched her great niece descend the gangplank. Fred saw Con's aunt reach out and take hold of her wrist. She held it in both hands, as if to make sure Con was real. Fred followed at a distance. Nobody called his name. Fred stood still in the bustle of the customs shed, looking out towards the ship. He tried to still the roar of disappointment in his chest. And then, suddenly, Fred saw his father, his suit crumpled beyond recognition, his coattails flying, running towards him, pushing alongside sailors and women in elaborate hats, flying faster than any aeroplane. "I thought I'd lost you," he said. He pulled him so close Fred felt his ribs creak next to his heart. "I could not have borne it, I could not." Fred buried his face hard into his father's coat. He thought of the man, alone again, striding out through the jungle. He could almost hear his voice. Every human on this earth is an explorer. Sometimes exploring is a word for walking out into the unknown. Sometimes it's a word for coming home. And this is the epilogue, so that's the last bit, and it's based 12 years later. Fred pushed open the door to the Ritz and strode towards the tea room as fast as he could go without running. He ignored the excited whispers from a crowd of boys following him across the foyer. Max jumped up when he saw Fred coming and knocked over the sugar bowl. He was tall now, as tall as Fred, and his face no longer had its round baby roundness, but his eyes still pointed upwards at the ends. "You came! We thought you might still be on an expedition." He embraced Fred, crushing him hard around the arms. "Fred!" Lila had grown beautiful, so beautiful that Fred always hesitated each time they met, feeling oddly embarrassed, until she grinned at him. Her wonky tooth, slightly wonkier now, was still there. She gave him a bear hug. "How was your trip? You've been in all the papers. A new kind of explorer, they say." Before he could answer, a voice came from behind them. "You all look so smart," it said. "You should have told me. I could have worn my ruffles." "Con," said Max. At first glance, Con looked very like she had done at the first day at that airfield, still with a jutting jaw, still at right angles with herself, but the blonde curls was gone, as was the expression of distrust. She wore her hair in a bob, high-waisted trousers and felt hat that looked just like a little pith helmet. The hat had in fact been a Christmas present from Fred the year before. Fred's father still called the upstairs room Con's room. A waitress approached them with a handful of menus. "Thank you," said Con, "but we've decided what to have a long time ago." "Could we have one of every cake in the menu?" asked Fred. "And 4 hot chocolates," said Max. He grinned in honour of the grub pancakes. "And 4 hot chocolates," said Max. He grinned in honour of the grub pancakes. As soon as the waitress had gone, Lila reached under the table. "I brought someone to celebrate with us. He's very, very old. The waitress might not like it though. Can you make a barrier with your coats?" She lifted the grey bundle of fur from the wicker basket by her side. Very, very slowly, it opened its eyes. "Backer," said Fred. "He's grown so enormous," said Con. "He's a very respectable old man these days," said Lila, "but he used to be such a terror." "A very slow motion terror," said Max. "He kept trying to eat the covers of my biology textbooks." They passed Max from hand to hand. His fur was less fluffy and he moved creakily, but his eyes were shining black and his nose was still inquisitive. He raised one slow arm and scooped a lump of brown sugar towards him. Then Fred held out his hand, palm up. It was very faint now, the mark, but you could still see it. "Still a secret?" Lila held out her hand. "Still a secret." Max spread his hand on the tablecloth. "Of course." "Always," said Con. Fred looked down at their 4 upturned palms. His own was still covered in burns and blisters from his last expedition. Lila's speckled with animal scratches, Con's stained with ink. Max broke the silence. "Do you think he's still there?" "I don't know," said Fred, "but I'll find out soon. I'm going back to the Amazon. As soon as the rains are over, I'm going to try and find it again." "But not to take anyone else to see it," said Con. "No, of course not. Just to say we survived. Just to say we kept on exploring." And that is the end of our book. If you're very, very clever and you read back through the chapters that are on the Google Drive link, you can find out who the explorer was. I couldn't work it out at first, and then I read back through it, and there's a clue right at the start, so you'll have to find out. Hint is, it's all about maggots in his elbow. Okay, fantastic. So, we've now read the whole book. We can now work out who the explorer is. So that is everything. Well done Year 5 for listening so constantly, even when you were probably bored out of your minds at home. You've been absolutely fantastic, and I've loved seeing and hearing everything that you've been doing. Well done, and if you work out who the explorer is, comment below and let me know.